Hello, my name is Dr. Emily Forbes. I'm an assistant professor of neurology at the University of Colorado Hospital, and I direct our Huntington's Disease Center of Excellence here. Today I'm going to talk about sleep, cognition, and neurodegeneration, and specifically I'll review a study that we're doing on sleep, cognition, and the association between Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease. An overview of today's talk. We'll start with what are neurodegenerative diseases like Huntington's and Parkinson's. We'll move on to why are we looking at sleep and cognition in these neurodegenerative diseases. And then we'll move on to talk about what is going on in the study that we're talking about today. And lastly, we'll talk about how the results of this study can help people with Huntington's, Parkinson's, and potentially other neurodegenerative diseases. So we'll start by answering the question, what are neurodegenerative diseases? Well, they're diseases that occur when there is cellular dysfunction in a portion of the nervous system, typically the brain. These disorders include things like Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. You may have heard of spinal muscular atrophy or different types of spinocerebellar ataxias, and there are many others. For the purposes of this talk and this project, we're going to focus on Parkinson's and Huntington's disease. While these are two totally different diseases, they do have some things in common. They are both caused by the buildup of abnormal proteins in specific parts of the brain, which then leads to the neurons, or brain cells, dying off. Although different proteins build up in Parkinson's and Huntington's, and different brain regions are affected by this, the similarity of both having a protein build up in the brain may be a key which can unlock potential novel treatments for not only these two, but many other neurodegenerative disorders. So let's start by reviewing Parkinson's disease, and then we'll review Huntington's disease. Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. It has variable causes. There are genetic causes, which make up about 15% of the causes of Parkinson's disease. There are also various environmental causes, and there are many unknown causes. But we do know that ultimately it's the accumulation of a protein called alpha-synuclein, which leads to aggregation in the cell, which you can see on the image on the right. The arrow on the upper image is pointing to a pink circle, so that is where all the alpha-synuclein is aggregating in the cell. That ultimately causes cellular dysfunction and death. And the image below, you can see there's an area of the brain called the substantia nigra that's in the very middle part of the brain. The image on top, you can see there's a dark streak in the substantia nigra. But as the alpha-synuclein aggregates and clumps up in the cell and the cells die off, you can see on the image below that that dark streak is lost, which signifies the loss of neurons. Symptoms of Parkinson's disease include motor symptoms, very commonly tremor, feeling of slowness, stiffness, and balance impairment. And it can be complicated by many other non-motor features, things like cognitive decline or mood changes, to name just a few. Unfortunately, there is no curative treatment or any disease-modifying treatment, meaning no treatment that could slow down the progression. Huntington's disease is another progressive neurodegenerative disease. Unlike Parkinson's, which has variable causes, Huntington's disease is always caused by the same genetic mutation. And you can see this on the image on the right. There's a CAG, which gets repeated in our cells, and if it's repeated too many times, then it expands into something that's very bad for our cells. That expansion leads to an abnormally long protein, and that long protein aggregates in the cell, and again leads to neuronal dysfunction and neuronal death. Now these are two different proteins, and Huntington's disease, the proteins affect first and foremost an area called the striatum, so a little bit different from the area affected in Parkinson's, but the same idea where a protein aggregates, builds up, and wreaks havoc on our cells, leading to cell death. Symptoms of Huntington's disease include progressive mood dysfunction, cognitive decline, and most notably motor decline. And so the motor decline in Huntington's disease looks very different from that in Parkinson's. It is typically extra movements, but it also has gait impairment and some abnormal posturing and balance impairment that go along with it. Similarly, there's no treatment or disease-modifying therapy, and unfortunately has a prognosis of 18 years from the time of motor onset. On to our next question. Why are we looking at sleep and cognition in these neurodegenerative diseases? Well, we know sleep is important. We have all felt the burden of a poor night's sleep. Sleep dysfunction has been associated with cognitive impairment in both healthy adults and individuals with various neurodegenerative diseases. Specifically in Parkinson's disease, increased slow-wave sleep, which is a certain phase of sleep, is associated with better cognitive performance. And you can see that image on the right, on that graph on the right. So this is from the paper that was cited, the Wood et al. 2021 paper. On the horizontal line, you see cognitive composite score. And so the further you get along that line, the closer to 2 you get, the better your cognition. And then on the vertical line, it says N3%. And what that means is the percent of slow-wave sleep. And the more slow-wave sleep you get, the better sleep is. And you can see people who have better cognition tend to have higher slow-wave sleep percentage. Well, not as much work has been done in sleep in Huntington's disease, but we do know that in Huntington's disease, sleep impairment is associated with cognitive impairment, with mood disorders, and with worse quality of life, both in the person affected with HD and their care partner. And the question here is, can getting a good sleep help clear out some of the abnormal proteins that build up and destroy brain cells? And so you can see on the image on the right what it looks like when these brain cells are destroyed. So on the right side of that brain is a normal brain. So this is a normal, healthy brain. On the left side, the image depicts a brain from someone with Huntington's disease. And you can see all that neuronal loss. The side that shows the brain with Huntington's disease is much smaller and has much more space in it than the normal brain, indicating all that cellular death and neuronal loss because of the buildup of these proteins. So in order to understand this more, I'm going to pivot slightly and tell you a little more about what our brains are doing while we're sleeping. This is somewhat of a busy slide that depicts different stages of sleep. On the left side of this image, you can see different EEG features. EEG stands for electroencephalography, and it's a measurement of our brain waves. On the right side of this image, we can see a figure called a hypnogram, and this depicts different stages of sleep over the course of an 8-hour night of sleep. The major thing here is to note that EEG characteristics of each sleep stage are listed on the left. And so we can tell based on brain waves whether somebody's awake, whether they're in REM sleep, early sleep, N2 sleep, or this N3 sleep, which is slow wave sleep. So this slow wave sleep, you see the waves here, the delta waves are pretty distinctive. They're much larger than the other stages of sleep. And it's thought that those large waves play an important role in maintaining our brain health. One theory about how those large waves help maintain brain health is the effect that it has on waste clearance via the glymphatic system. So the glymphatic system is a central waste removal system, and it's responsible for clearance of proteins from the brain. Now, our brains are very active organs, and just from normal living, our brains produce a lot of metabolic waste. So therefore, our brains already have systems in place to remove waste products. One of those systems is called the glymphatic system. Now, in order to understand this, it's important to know that our brain cells are kind of awash in the cerebral spinal fluid. And one way to get rid of protein waste and other waste products is to have them removed when the fluid moves naturally from the artery towards the vein. Now, while there's normal metabolic waste in healthy brains, in individuals with neurodegenerative diseases such as Huntington's or Parkinson's, there's also those abnormal proteins built up. And so a potential way to get rid of those abnormal proteins is to remove them with the aid of the glymphatic system. Now, interestingly, we know that sleep affects waste clearance from the glymphatic system, and we think it's because those large brain waves that we looked at in the last slide, that slow wave sleep, help create a gradient that clears out the waste products. And interestingly, there's data that indicate that the glymphatic system is selectively active during slow wave sleep. And so this information provides a potential mechanism for the relationship between slow wave sleep and the buildup of these abnormal proteins. And so with that knowledge, let's move on and talk a little bit about the study we're conducting here at the University of Colorado. The study that we're doing here looks at the relationship between slow wave sleep, cognition, and glymphatic clearance in Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease. The goals of this study are to understand how slow wave sleep affects cognition and HD. We also want to understand if fluid movement in the cerebral spinal fluid plays a role. So this is focusing on the glymphatic system to see if that plays a role in potentially cognition. Ultimately, we would like to know if enhancement of sleep could be a feasible novel therapeutic target, so a new potential avenue of treatment that could slow down the progression of neurodegenerative disorders like Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease. Now, we won't get that information from this small pilot study, but this could provide early data that could build into larger studies that could help provide this information and potentially provide a new disease-modifying target. So let's talk about what this study actually entails. The first step in the study is to complete several cognitive evaluations. So this will occur on day 1. We'll ask people who are interested or people who are participating to complete some cognitive evaluations, some sleep questionnaires, fill out some demographic information, and we'll get some recordings of some Huntington's disease characteristics. On the second day, we'll complete step 2. So this is looking at slow wave sleep and cognition. So what we'll do is we will ask people to come in overnight for a polysomnography. So that's the term for a sleep study. And so this is how we know what stage of sleep someone is in. So if you remember that EEG from before, this is how we can tell if somebody is in slow wave sleep where they're having those large delta waves. We'll ask participants to spend the night in our sleep lab, which is depicted in that middle image. And the image on the right just depicts what it looks like. We have people hooked up to a lot of different things to help record their brain waves, their heart rate, their oxygen level. So we take a lot of recordings overnight. Then, the morning after the sleep study, we'll ask participants to get a specialized type of MRI before they leave the medical campus. This type of MRI is called diffusion tensor imaging along perivascular space. And so this helps give us an idea of how well the glymphatic system is working. And that is the complete study. So we would ask for time on 3 separate days for participants to do some assessments, spend the night at the medical campus for a sleep assessment, and get an MRI prior to leaving the next morning. So how will results of this study help? Well, it'll help give us an idea of if slow wave sleep is associated with cognition in Huntington's disease. It will also allow us to measure glymphatic clearance in people who participate. And ultimately, it could help us understand if enhancing slow wave sleep might be a viable intervention to slow the progression of Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, and potentially other neurodegenerative diseases. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their attention. If anybody who's watching this is interested in participating in research in Huntington's disease, Parkinson's, or other neurologic conditions, please reach out to us at this email or this phone number. And this is a picture of our medical campus on the right. And so I hope this was helpful to everyone. Thank you.